So we're on a journey together. Mile 3. Mile 3 is actually easier than mile 2. Mile 2 really hurts. Mile 2, you start to question yourself. What was I thinking when I started? Mile 3 is like the finish line is close. If you're running a 5K, that is. But it's still hard. There's still work to be done. It's still a challenge to be had. But nonetheless, you're on the journey, and that's the important thing, is that you're on the journey. You're putting one step in front of the other, and you're pursuing something. You're working. Today's leg of the journey is one that's typically forgotten, especially in today's society. For over a decade now, we've been in this individualism idea that we can do it ourselves. We don't need anybody else. We can do it. It's okay. It may take longer, it may take more work, but I don't need anybody else. I can take care of me. Have we decided yet that it doesn't work? But we would actually need somebody else to agree with us to confirm that. And since we're on this individualism kick, that we can't come to an agreement because that requires two people. And I'm my own person, and I make that decision. So go home and Google individualism for those of you who didn't just get what I said. So we find ourselves with these two travelers. We know that one of them is named Cleopas. We know that they have left Jerusalem, and we know that they are heading towards Emmaus, a narrow, dusty road outside of Jerusalem, and they're traveling on this road. They're disappointed. The Bible tells us that they were downcast. They didn't know what was going to happen next. They were hopeless. But Luke tells us that this traveler came up and was beside them and began to take the journey with them. He didn't speak a lot, but yet when he spoke with authority. They didn't recognize him as Jesus. They actually take him as somebody who's definitely not in the know. He doesn't seem to know what in the world just took place in Jerusalem. It's like they even ask him, "Are you the only visitor here in Jerusalem who doesn't know what just happened?" If they only knew who they were saying that to. So they're on their third mile. They've gotten through mile 1, which is understanding that they need forgiveness of their sins. They've gone through mile 2, which is salvation. Understanding that we need Jesus to die on the cross and in his resurrection to have salvation to be available to us. And that by dying on that cross that we can receive the forgiveness of our sins. But yet, even in our spiritual journey, we're tempted to think it's on us. We're tempted to think that we have to do this ourselves. When we think about our sins, we don't want anyone else to know about them. So we carry the weight of them. We go through the process of repenting and receiving forgiveness, but we're not going to let anybody else in. We're going to keep them at a distance. And you see, we've come to this place in our world today where loneliness has actually become an epidemic. Loneliness destroys the life that we were meant to live. Did you know that people who are lonely have a 26% higher risk of death than those who do not feel lonely? But you may be tempted to think that your social media involvement is protecting you from the effects of isolation. Think again. There's actually a direct correlation between the amount of time you spend on Facebook and the likelihood that your overall sense of power and satisfaction, your power and your satisfaction, including your social connectedness, will actually go down based on the amount of time that you spend on social media. Because we think that we're being connected, that we're in relationships. The fact that Mark Zuckerberg created a system where everybody is your friend was nothing short of a marketing strategy. Because what do we crave? We crave relationships. We were created to be in relationships with people. We want people to know us, but we also want to control how much they know about us. And if we're going to tell them something that's serious about our lives, we want to be able to not have to deal with their reaction to it. And so we post it on Facebook, whether it's ugly or not, but it's okay because you don't have to stand face to face with the backlash or the insults or the ridicule that you may face. Because, by all means, if you don't like what they say, you can just unfriend them with a click of a button. That's what our society has come to connect relationship with, is a virtual friend. But we find that it actually takes us the other direction. So when we need a good theology lesson, we turn to Rocky. Because Rocky has some great lines in it, right? The movie Rocky, hopefully, if you're a certain age, you probably don't even know who Rocky is. But for those of you who know the Rocky movies, will probably recognize this line in the movie. Adrian's brother worked in the meat factory. And he's standing there, he's butchering some meat. He's got a cleaver in one hand, and he looks over to Rocky and he asks him, "So what's going on with my sister? Do you really like her?" I'm not sure he liked her at this point, but he's asking Rocky, do you even like her? He's like, "Yeah, sure I like her." I don't see it. I don't see the attraction. I don't get it. "I don't know," Rocky says. "She fills gaps, I guess." "What's gaps?" the brother said. And Rocky simply says, "I've got gaps. She's got gaps. Together, we fill gaps." Relationship 101. Right there. From Rocky. Words to live by. We all have gaps. Our relationships fill those gaps. There's a reason the majority of your friends do not look like you. They don't respond the way you do. They don't process things the way you do. Why? Because you can only handle one of you. But you need people around you to help fill the gaps that you don't have the ability to fill yourself. Think about your relationships. If you're married, think about your spouse. You know, I think about Jennifer and I, and she fills a lot more of my gaps than I fill of hers. But if there is a spider that needs killed, buddy, I've got that gap filled. If there is a crisis, if there's a kid who throws up, I've got that gap. Because Jennifer's in the other neighborhood, because she's out the door. There are situations where I'm good and she's not. There are situations where she is a lot better at handling than I am. I can remember when we actually were talking about this not too long ago. On our honeymoon, we went to Hawaii. And of course, we don't have a ton of money, so we're going to the condominium, the timeshare presentation so that we can get the free luau in the evening. So we go through this whole thing, and they give us the tour. This lady's really nice, talking to us and sharing all this stuff. And then we sit down, and she starts talking shop with us, and we're like, nope, not interested. Nope, probably won't be back to Hawaii anytime soon. So, and then the boss comes in. The boss sits down across from me and begins to pile on the guilt trip. You want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Not make available the family activities that you will be able to provide to your kids. You want to take away the opportunity for your children to not have this great experience and all this stuff. And Jennifer says, she's just like, what's it have to do with anything? Ask the story to Jennifer later because she'll correct everything I said. That's her gap filler. And so Jennifer answered him, but he was talking to me. So guess what he does? He looks at me and says, are you going to let her talk for you? I took a deep breath, getting ready to exhale a bunch of things I probably shouldn't say, and she cuts me off. I didn't even get a word out. I wanted to verbally smack him in the face. And and she just, but when we walked out, I'm like, thank you for doing that, because I wasn't going to say anything nice to that guy. Filling gaps. She knew exactly. We hadn't even been married for a day yet, and she knew exactly where to cut me off. Our relationships build our lives. They make us stronger people. And if your relationships are healthy, it should make you a better person. The people around you should build you up, even when they challenge you. If you have friends people you call friends, but they're afraid to say the truth to you because they want you to be your friend, or they want you to be their friend, so they don't tell you the truth, they're not your friends. I firmly believe that your friends are not afraid to tick you off. They're willing to put your relationship on the line to make you a better person. Do your relationships do that for you? But let's not get caught up in relationships between each other. Let's think about God. I firmly believe that God is the gap filler of our lives. He fills every gap that we have in our lives, and He fills them with His grace and His love. He takes our weaknesses and he makes us strong. How does he do that? By bringing people into our lives. In John 19, verses 25 and 27 through 27, it says, "Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby," John is very humble, by the way. He's referring to himself, or Luke is referring to John, or no, John is referring to John, sorry. He said to him, Jesus said, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, the disciple took her into his home. What's going on here? Well, even in Jesus, as he's dying on the cross, he's doing and carrying out his family duty. He's making sure that his mother is taken care of. We don't know where Joseph is. We can only assume that he's probably died at some point as Jesus has been growing up. We know that Jesus and Mary are the ones in the home. And the only way that Mary is able to take care of herself, is able to provide for herself, is through Jesus. Through what he brings in through being a carpenter. Without Jesus, it's very possible that Mary would struggle to make ends meet. She would struggle to have food on her table because women were not treated very well in that time. And so Jesus knows that Mary needs to be connected to a man. That she needs somebody to fill this gap in her life that Jesus is not going to be able to fill anymore. And so he takes some of the last dying breaths that he has, and he tells John, "This is your mom. You're going to take care of her from now on. You're going to provide for her. You're going to fill the gap that she's going to have." But I can only assume that Mary, being a good mother, was able to fill some gaps that John had. She was able to go into his home and cook the meals for him, take care of the home. And I'm sure there was many other things that women did back then that I'm unaware of. But there was these gaps that were being filled as Jesus makes sure that the mother is taken care of. In Luke chapter 24, when we see our travelers on the road, Cleopas has just given Jesus the update on what just actually took place in Jerusalem, as if Jesus didn't know, but they didn't know it was Jesus. So they wanted to fill in this uninformed guy leaving Jerusalem. And in verse 25, we see that Jesus responds pretty aggressively to what Cleopas says. In verse 25, he says, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. He helped inform them. He helped update them on what actually happened. Verse 28, it says that as they approached the village to which they were going, Emmaus, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. So these two travelers have reached their destination. So they think. They've reached their destination, and it says that Jesus is acting like he's going to continue on, that he has further to go on his journey. But then they ask him, please stay with us. What was Jesus doing? What was Jesus doing by acting like he was going to go further? Well, my two very handsome gentlemen up here that don't know that they're volunteers are going to come down up here and they're going to help me help communicate to you what exactly Jesus was doing. So while they're coming, I'll talk a little more. So we know that we have gaps. We know that these two travelers had gaps. We all have them. We all struggle. We all have gaps in our life. We all have gaps in our faith. Stand right there for me, Bryce. Right there. Good job, man. Caleb. Right over here. Face that way, right there. Okay. So, this young man, Bryce, my nephew, represents me, where I'm at, where I started my journey in my faith. The weight on his shoulders is just getting so heavy because of what he has to carry right now. Because I was lost. I didn't even know I was lost. I didn't know what lost was. But I knew that I wasn't in a correct relationship with God. I wasn't living the way that I was supposed to. I didn't have a relationship with Jesus. But I began the journey. September 13th, 2000. I gave my life to Christ. And my journey began. The weight on my shoulders was a little bit less. And so I began the journey. And then this guy here, he's going to represent Jesus. And you see, the typical thing that we want to happen is we want to think that this is what's happening. That as I move forward in my faith, Jesus is walking just right alongside me. Not happening. Because that makes you perfect. And guess what? We're not perfect. But you see, the reality is, Jesus is up here. He's in front of us. He's our example. He's modeling how we should live in our faith. Stay right there. So I'm growing in my faith. And as I move forward in my faith, guess what Jesus does? He moves my target. I'm trying to catch up to him, and every step I take, he just keeps going. But we think we're not gaining any ground because we're not growing in our faith because Jesus is just still making it hard for us. Every time we learn how to be a better follower of Christ, something else we read in the Bible that we're not doing yet. Well, we got to work. We got to do a little more work. But yet we forget about this. We forget about where we started because we're too worried about this. But you see, what is this? It's a gap. And that gap is filled with grace. You see, what I believe that Jesus was doing to these two travelers when it says that he was going to continue on is exactly where the journey begins. You see, Jesus wants to be pursued. You see, it would be easy for Jesus to continue on in his journey and just keep going, and I stay right here. You see, this is when we pray a prayer, but our life does not change. Because Jesus wants us to pursue him. Thank you, guys. You see, it's in our pursuit that our faith is built. If we stay right where we are and we don't pursue Jesus, we're not going to grow. We're going to stay right where we are. And then the question becomes, did we really have any faith at all? Or were we just trying to not have to go to hell when we die? Are we pursuing him? You see, your faith is built on the pursuit. If we don't pursue him and we don't seek to grow in our relationship with him, we're not going to get anywhere. But I promise, if we pursue him, I think the reality of our growth is not so much Jesus being right here and us being back here and us looking at Jesus back. You see, I think it's more like this. And as we move closer to him, he just steps a little bit farther back. Because he's making eye contact with us. He wants us to come closer to him. Do we want to go closer to someone when we're just staring at their back? No, but if somebody's engaged with us, and they're looking us eye to eye, and they're loving us, and then when we stumble, they're catching us. Anybody tried to ask someone to catch them when they have their back turned to you? Can't really do that, can they? No, but if Jesus is walking with us, he can see when we're getting ready to fall, and he can catch us. It's that relationship. It's that filling the gap in our life. We just sang a song in the garden, and we sang, and he walks with us and he talks with us. But here's the thing. These two travelers, they were walking with Jesus. And they were talking with Jesus. But yet they didn't recognize him. Are we really walking and talking with Jesus? Or are we doing the talking to ourselves? Pursuing something we hope will change our lives? How do we fill the gaps in each other's lives? Well, I firmly believe that the gaps are filled in our lives because Jesus brings those people into our lives. I know that I can look back over my life and I can see people that God inserted into my life for a reason I wasn't even facing yet. For a circumstance I didn't even know was going to happen. But that person had maybe had some similar circumstances. They had walked that journey before, and they were able to help me go through it. But somehow, in our minds, it's like this person miraculously showed up in our life. Now, I don't believe in coincidences. I believe that God uses us to fill gaps in other people's lives. We each have gifts and graces that other people don't have. And he uses us to speak into their lives, to be able to help them when they need our help, to serve them when they're unable to do something. But I believe that we're able to fill the gaps in people's life when we're pursuing first our relationship with Jesus. Because, see, we're tempted to walk through life and miss how God can use us, how God can use us to fill gaps. Because we're not connected to the person who's putting us in people's lives to begin with. But when we begin to see people as God sees them, our eyes begin to see differently. Our heart begins to serve differently. You see, the journey was never meant to be walked alone. It's been said that you have to follow Jesus for yourself, but you can't follow him by yourself, at least not effectively anyway. Your spiritual success will only be as strong as your support system. It will only be as strong as your support system. Do you have a support system behind you? I know there are some people that you're a follower of Jesus, but maybe your spouse isn't. That's a difficult situation. You have two different worldviews at that point. You're living for two different things at that point. Do you have somebody that you can walk with? And for the record, make sure that it's not someone of the opposite sex that you're walking that spiritual journey with, just for the record, because that doesn't end typically well. But do you have somebody in your life that you can share the struggles that you're going on, that can understand where you're coming from on a spiritual level? Someone that can guide you spiritually, that can help you make decisions spiritually. I'm not saying give up on your spouse, by no means. I'm saying pray even more for them. Be even more involved in their life, as you should, since they're your spouse. But that relationship's important. But we should never go through our spiritual life alone. We're strong based on the system that we have built around us to hold us up.